also it depletes intracellular glutathione. Glutathione. And I'm saying this because this is very important for many of you. As you go through treatment, you're going to hear about this. Because glutathione is the major intracellular antioxidant. We've talked about antioxidants, right? Combats that oxidative stress. And detoxifier. What could be better? You have something that quiets the oxidative stress and something that detoxifies. It is a key player in the cell, glutathione. And before I show you the molecule, we see oxidative stress in a lot of the adult correlates, neurodegenerative disorders, Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease. These all have increased oxidative stress and inflammation. So there are very similar correlates between what we're seeing as we're getting older and what we see in children with autism. And even there's been reports of oxidative stress in ADHD as well. This is that glutathione molecule. It's a very small protein. It's made of 3 amino acids. We call it a tripeptide, very, very small. Glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. And what gives it its detoxifying characteristics, an antioxidant, is sulfur and hydrogen. We call it a sulfhydryl group. Okay? This little molecule has such profound importance in the cell. And many of our children are low in the active or reduced form. And that is a problem. And so part of what we do is we try to enhance glutathione status. And I'll show you ways to do that when I talk about therapeutics. But you can actually modulate mercury-induced neurotoxicity, the toxic effects on a neuron, you can, via the oxidative stress from the methyl. This is methylmercury. This is in fish. And when I talk to a lot of parents, especially in Asia, what happened when they were pregnant? It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. But you ate a lot of fish. Because why? Because you thought fish was good. In the States, tuna was said to be a very, very inexpensive protein, very good protein. So a lot of people are eating tuna fish left and right, mothers were. The problem is it's high in methylmercury. All of the big fish, unfortunately, those really delicious sushi-grade grilled fish, tuna, swordfish, sea bass, oh, I used to love those. I don't eat them now. Maybe rarely. I'm not going to say never, but almost never, because, and you know, the really high-grade sushi-grade tuna was just hard to beat when it's grilled right. But the problem is methylmercury causes toxicity via oxidative stress, but you can modulate that toxicity by increasing the glutathione in the cell. And one of the ways you can do that is by giving it a precursor of glutathione, N-acetylcysteine. Now here, remember I said cysteine is one of the components. That's what gives it this SH or sulfhydryl group, which is what latches on to the heavy metals. So if you give it as N-acetylcysteine, NAC, for those of you who've heard of NAC, you can increase glutathione in the cell. The problem with NAC is that it can affect the gut, because these sulfur molecules can feed dysbiotic bacteria and yeast in the gut. So if the gut is not clean, these kind of things will make things worse. So you have to make sure you deal with the gut first. And that's when, in our field, that's what we always are conscious of. We try to clear the gut. And basically, oral glutathione doesn't really get absorbed. It may help the antioxidant status in the gut, except the liposomal form, that may get absorbed. So we try to build up glutathione in the cell by other means, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Okay. And these are a lot of other functions that glutathione does. It detoxifies, it's an antioxidant. Not only does it detoxify heavy metals, it detoxifies phenolic compounds. And some of the kids are very sensitive to phenolics. They have a problem with sulfation. And how you might know that, some of those kids, they get the bright red ears, with the bright red cheeks, and they're irritable and hyper. Be aware of phenolics. Phenolics are in the high colored. Unfortunately, some of the healthy vegetables have high in phenolics. Some of the healthy supplements, proanthocyanins, the grapeseed extract, curcumin, these are very, very good, but they also have phenolics and the kid's sensitive. Grapes, apples, bananas, tomatoes, berries are high in phenolics for those. And glutathione is important in detoxifying the phenolics for immune response. because glutathione is also, besides helping to maintain the gastrointestinal integrity, preventing from too much permeability, we call leaky gut, it also is essential for proper immune function and response, and for modulating the inflammatory immune messenger molecules. So the last thing you want to do is you lower your glutathione by giving Tylenol after vaccination. And yet what were people told to do routinely? Give your child Tylenol. So we say if there's a problem, a little reaction, you give ibuprofen, not Tylenol. All right, now let's look at the genetic predispositions. So I want to give you an understanding of how it works, okay? This is a concept, a big word, called genetic polymorphisms, okay? Genetic polymorphisms. And these are so very simplistically, you have chromosomes, we all have chromosomes, and we all have 23 pairs, all right? And this is what makes us who we are. And these chromosomes are made of genes, and these genes are made of DNA, and these, what we call these nucleotides, these little cross-hatched nucleotides, A and T and C and G, not important really. And they're spiral-like staircases, right? Well, and then they code. So genes code for proteins, and you're made of proteins. Your cells are made of proteins, so you have structural proteins that make your cell, like scaffolding, and you have functional proteins, like enzymes that make these reactions go. So your genes code for proteins. Well, if you change a gene, like a single nucleotide, so maybe you change it an A to a C, or a C to a T, right? One change, we call it a single nucleotide polymorphism, or a SNP. That's enough to change the protein that that gene codes for. And if it's an enzyme, it doesn't make it maybe not work at all, but it maybe makes it a bit less functional. But what about if that enzyme was an enzyme that was supposed to detoxify those flame retardants that your kids being exposed to at night? That child is going to be more susceptible to the flame retardants because of that change in the gene that makes a change in the enzyme so that they can't detoxify as well. I'll give you a couple examples. So this is what's called SNPs, or genetic polymorphisms. And these are more and more. We test for one in the folate cycle, I'll show you, but there are others that can be tested that can give you an idea of predispositions. The problem is some people are testing these and saying, okay, because of this, this is what you have, this is what you have to take. And the reality is, this is just like a roadmap. So you have to put this together with the clinical history and everything else in the labs. It's not just the genetic polymorphisms, but it will give you a sense of where you may have a vulnerability. Like maybe it shows you that you have a problem with methylation, so you need more methyl B12 or methylfolate, some of the things that we use. If some of you already have been doing things with your kids, you've heard of some of these things. And this is just an idea that genetic predisposition is an important factor in vulnerability to insult. Remember I said genetic vulnerability coupled with environmental triggers. Well, this is not about kids, but this is a classic example of the soldiers from the US and other countries that went to the Gulf War. First of all, they got hit with a ton of vaccinations all at once. Before they went, they got exposed to all kinds of chemicals and probably even bioinfectious agents. And a lot of them came back with this chronic fatigue and chronic headaches, all these symptoms, and they were said it's post-traumatic stress syndrome. And all those of us in my field knew it wasn't post-traumatic stress syndrome. Sure, there was stress, there's no question. But we knew they had been exposed to all kinds of toxicants, had been hit with a huge amount of vaccinations all at once. And a lot of those vaccinations have things to make you respond quicker, and they're like aluminum and chemicals in them, as well as all the stuff they got exposed to, all those agents, organophosphate pesticides and things. And it turns out that those that have this gene, the PONA gene, that helps to detoxify organophosphate pesticides, those who had this little shift in the gene, what we call that polymorphism, their enzyme was not up to snuff. It couldn't detoxify those pesticides. And they were more vulnerable to the neurotoxins. Okay, do you understand that? That's what happened. So these were more vulnerable. So they came back. And for years they were told it's all in your head, it's post-traumatic stress. And that was so unfair, because there was a real thing going on. And now I think finally the Pentagon, which was, it took them years to admit it. If you have a polymorphism in this glutathione is transferred, there's a lot of enzymes that have glutathione in them, you're more sensitive to arsenic. So the same arsenic exposure, and the child with this polymorphism is going to be more susceptible. Okay? This is a study that talks, this is just these cycles. Now, this is what I was talking about with the doctors. All right? So I'm not going to ask who are the doctors in the audience. I know a couple of them. You learned this in biochemistry. And you probably never wanted to see it again, I bet, right? And you're not going to be tested. This is complex biochemistry. This takes a lot of time to learn. This is oddly where I live with these kids because it's so important to understand this. This is a methylation cycle. This is a sulfuration cycle. This is a folate cycle. These are all part of crucial cellular processes, including detoxification. Methylation is a process that you need to methylate your DNA. Remember I said your genes are made of DNA. Well, you turn off your DNA by methylating it. Just think about it. If you didn't, you don't recognize that most of your DNA is turned off. Only a little bit is turned on, because if all of your DNA was turned on in every cell, how would you have a difference between a liver cell and a brain cell or a heart cell? You have to turn off DNA. It's very important. You have to methylate hormones and neurotransmitters to metabolize them, to stop them from, so let's say you have an excitatory neurotransmitter that's going like, you know, do this, right? Well, that's okay, you need to do it. What happens if you can't shut it off? And you're like, don't some of the kids look like this? Right? You need to be able to detoxify and metabolize hormones, estrogen. It's very important even in women's hormonal metabolism. Okay? And all these, and then ultimately, I put this here because you ultimately end up with glutathione. So these cycles are important to work to make the glutathione, that is the major intracellular antioxidant and detoxifier. And I'm drumming this in because I want you to leave with a couple of things. You're not going to remember everything. You don't have to. But you're going to remember glutathione, I have a feeling. It's the major antioxidant and detoxifier. So these cycles have to work to make that. Okay, that's why I put this in here. And you see glutathione goes to various kinds of enzymes. It's part of the enzymes that, and also all these enzymes that make this reaction goes have cofactors. So this is called the methionine synthase that takes this homocysteine back to methionine. Its cofactor is methyl B12. And as you're going to see later on when I talk about ADHD, this methionine synthase is affected by toxicants, exquisitely sensitive. And so if you have a polymorphism so that the enzyme is not as functional, what do? You either can give more of the cofactor to push the reaction to get what you want, or you give more of the end product. So the nice thing about this whole thing is that we used to think genetic predisposition, we didn't call them predisposition, we used to think genetics were basically inflexible and unfixable. Now, a lot of what I do in my field is nutritional modulation of genetic expression. You can actually affect genetic expression by using cofactors or end products. Or if you this is what we test, MTHFR. If you have a polymorphism that makes this enzyme less functional, you're going to have less of this methyl tetrahydrofolate. Every time I go back here. Yeah. No, okay. So you have methyl tetrahydrofolate here. So you can either give the cofactor of an enzyme like here B12, or here you can give the end product. So because you're not getting enough end product because the reaction is not working, so you give it. So nutritionally, we can actually try to get around these blocks. That's the nice thing. That's the encouraging thing. Genetics is no longer a fait accompli for breast cancer. Sometimes you can give certain things to help metabolize the